On the evening of March 25, 2022, life in the quiet suburb of Mayfield carried on as usual. Among the rows of modest apartment complexes lining Krebert Street stood Mackenzie's unit, unassuming and tucked within the peaceful surroundings of the neighborhood. As the night progressed, unsettling sounds began to pierce the stillness. Neighbors later recounted hearing raised voices, an argument escalating in intensity. One concerned resident, unable to ignore the sense of danger, made the crucial decision to contact emergency services. They feared this was no ordinary domestic dispute. Something felt terribly wrong. When officers from the Newcastle City Police District responded to the call, they arrived to a harrowing scene. They were quickly joined by paramedics, who rushed inside with equipment and urgency, trying to stabilize the situation and save a life. But despite their swift and determined efforts, the outcome was devastating. Mackenzie had suffered critical injuries so severe that nothing could be done to bring her back. Tragically, she was pronounced dead at the scene. Dear viewers, we appreciate your support and comments. It means a lot to us. Thank you for being with us. Born and raised in the coastal city of Newcastle, located in the heart of New South Wales, Australia, Mackenzie's story began in a community known for its laid-back charm, tight-knit neighborhoods, and deep sense of belonging. From her earliest years, she was surrounded by a loving and supportive family unit that provided a strong foundation for her values and resilience. Her mother, Tabitha Ackret, worked as a dental hygienist, dedicating herself not only to her career, but also wholeheartedly to raising her daughter with care, patience, and strength. The mother-daughter bond between Tabitha and Mackenzie was undeniable, one that would later shine through in the heartfelt tributes Tabitha shared, revealing the depth of her grief and the pride she felt in the woman her daughter had become. Mackenzie's family life extended beyond her biological parents. She shared a meaningful and affectionate relationship with her stepfather, who played a vital role in her upbringing, treating her as his own and supporting her through both joyful moments and difficult times. Her inner circle of friends described her as the beating heart of their group, the one who could always lighten a heavy moment with humor and who offered warmth, loyalty, and empathy to those around her. Mackenzie was known for her infectious laugh, her ability to find beauty in everyday moments, and her remarkable capacity to connect with others, often using social media platforms like TikTok to share glimpses into her life. Through short, candid videos, she brought laughter, inspiration, and a sense of authenticity that resonated with many, especially other young mothers navigating similar paths. Her young son, just 23 months old, was the light of her life and her greatest motivation. Every decision she made revolved around his well-being, his happiness, and the future she hoped to build for him. Despite the challenges that came her way, Mackenzie remained steadfast in her commitment to creating a safe, loving, and secure environment for her child. Life had not been without its trials. By her early 20s, she found herself facing the often overwhelming responsibilities of single parenthood. Living in a modest unit on Krebert Street, Mackenzie juggled the demands of daily life with quiet determination, never losing sight of her dreams for a better tomorrow. Those close to her said she often spoke about breaking cycles, of hardship, of instability, and of fear, and building a life filled with hope and opportunity for her son. But there was a shadow that loomed large in Mackenzie's life, one that she had been trying to escape for some time. Her relationship with her former partner, Tyrone Thompson, began in late 2019. What started as a seemingly ordinary romance soon evolved into a turbulent and emotionally exhausting cycle of highs and lows. By October 25, 21, the situation had escalated to a point of serious concern. Thompson was arrested and subsequently jailed for actions that included causing harm to Mackenzie, engaging in threatening behavior, and damaging her belongings. He was sentenced to a short period of imprisonment with a non-parole period of just over 4 months and was released on March 9, 2022. To protect her from further contact or distress, an apprehended violence order was issued, legally prohibiting Thompson from approaching or communicating with Mackenzie in any form. Despite this legal protection, Mackenzie continued to live in a state of persistent anxiety. Those closest to her revealed that she feared the AVO would not be enough to deter him once he was back on the outside. Her concern was not unwarranted. In a deeply concerning message to a friend, she confided, "My ex Tyrone just got out of jail from what he did to me and is still being weird and harassing me. He couldn't last 24 hours. These words, written with a mix of weariness and fear, would later haunt those who read them. After his release, Thompson reportedly began contacting Mackenzie almost immediately, disregarding the restrictions placed upon him. He reached out via phone calls and through various social media platforms, circumventing the order and escalating her sense of vulnerability. Friends said she felt torn between the residual emotional ties to someone she once cared for and the increasing sense of unease over his continued presence in her life. There was an unspoken tension, one that suggested she was holding on to hope for calm, even as the warning signs mounted. A tragic and poignant detail later emerged from the days leading up to the incident. For Christmas 2021, Mackenzie had asked her family for a set of kitchen knives, an entirely ordinary and practical gift, a symbol of her efforts to build a functional, well-equipped home for her and her son. It was an innocent request that, in hindsight, would take on an unbearably somber meaning. On the night of March 25th, 2022, life in the peaceful suburb of Mayfield unfolded like any other. The neighborhood, filled with unassuming apartment blocks and familiar faces, was the kind of place where residents exchanged polite nods, where front porches held potted plants, and where parents strolled with prams in the early evening light. Mackenzie's apartment was part of this world, a small, humble unit within a quiet complex on Crebert Street. That evening, Mackenzie was not alone. A male friend, whose identity remained confidential in initial reports, was visiting. And at some point, Tyrone Thompson appeared at the apartment. How exactly he gained entry remains uncertain. What is known is that he had been explicitly instructed, both legally and personally, not to be there. Reports would later confirm that he had been asked repeatedly to leave that night. His failure to do so marked a turning point, one that would soon result in irreversible consequences. Neighbors later recalled hearing raised voices, the sounds of an argument cutting through the stillness of the night. Alarmed by the escalation, one neighbor placed a call to emergency services, sensing that the situation unfolding was more than a domestic disagreement. It was something far more serious. Though the contents of that emergency call were not made public, officials confirmed that the urgency and distress conveyed were clear enough to prompt a rapid response. When officers from the Newcastle City Police District arrived, they were met with a deeply troubling scene. Paramedics joined law enforcement at the apartment in an urgent attempt to provide aid. Despite every effort made by first responders, it was tragically too late. Mackenzie's injuries were severe and she could not be revived. She was pronounced deceased at the scene, leaving behind a heartbroken family, a devastated circle of friends, and a son. The aftermath of the tragedy sent shockwaves throughout the community. Questions were raised about the effectiveness of protective measures, the persistent challenges faced by survivors. Local police commander, Superintendent Wayne Humphrey, later addressed the media with a somber tone that reflected the magnitude of what had unfolded. He described the scene encountered by first responders as deeply disturbing and profoundly confronting. What authorities found when they arrived at the apartment block on Crebert Street would leave a lasting mark on those involved in the response. It was not simply a crime scene. It was a scene of devastation, grief, and unthinkable loss. Among the first observations made by officers was the presence of a man, later officially identified as 22-year-old Tyrone Thompson, positioned at the top of the building's communal staircase. He sat cross-legged, his posture unusually calm, yet his voice reportedly loud and insistent. Witnesses and officers described him as demanding immediate medical attention for a visible injury to his hand. Despite the circumstances, he appeared to be more concerned with his own condition than with the tragedy that had just occurred mere steps away. Officers, although trained to compartmentalize during traumatic situations, were faced with the grim and urgent task of responding to what had clearly been an life-altering incident. Lying near McKenzie, investigators located the broken remains of a kitchen knife, its blade separated from the handle, both fragments stained and sitting as mute evidence of what had taken place. This discovery, though clinical in nature, was emotionally jarring. The knife was quickly confirmed to be part of the set Mackenzie had received as a Christmas gift, a practical and well-meaning present from her family. No one could have imagined it would one day be involved in such a heart-wrenching outcome. Immediately following his detainment at the scene, Thompson was arrested by police and placed under guard before being transported to John Hunter Hospital. His hand injury, while treated promptly, raised immediate and serious questions about the circumstances of the night and his direct involvement in the events that had transpired. The sequence of events that led to this tragic night, however, had not appeared out of nowhere. It had been quietly building, layer by layer, in the weeks following Thompson's release from incarceration. After serving a brief sentence for his previous assault on Mackenzie, Thompson walked free from prison on March 9, 2022. Despite the conditions of an active apprehended violence order, a legal protection intended to prevent any contact with Mackenzie, he began violating the terms almost immediately. Within days of his release, Thompson began reaching out again. He called her, sent her messages from various social media accounts, and even contacted individuals connected to Mackenzie's new relationship. This relentless pattern of contact wasn't just unwelcome. It was illegal and deeply distressing for Mackenzie, who had already lived through trauma and intimidation at his hands. As later confirmed by court records and interviews with friends, Mackenzie found herself in a frightening emotional and psychological limbo. Despite the AVO and her desire to move on, she struggled to fully separate from Thompson's persistent efforts to re-enter her life. During the 6 days leading up to March 25th, she reportedly spent extended periods of time with him, likely out of fear, coercion, or the complexity of trying to keep peace for her child's sake. Friends said Mackenzie often felt she had no viable path out, caught in a place where fear of escalation made even the thought of resisting his presence feel risky. On the night in question, Mackenzie hosted a small gathering at her apartment. Present were Tyrone Thompson and another man, a friend of Mackenzie's whose name remained protected in early reporting due to the sensitive nature of the case. While the dynamics among those in the apartment remain partially unclear, what is certain is that tension mounted over the course of the evening. The male friend reportedly left the apartment at some point, but a gut feeling led him to return later. What he walked into was a scene that would leave him shaken and horrified, a moment that he would later describe to police as something he could never forget. In the weeks leading up to this tragic outcome, Mackenzie had been trying to take steps to protect herself. Evidence later presented in court and revealed by investigators showed that she had reached out to advocacy and domestic safety organizations, expressing a growing concern for her safety. She emailed requests for advice on implementing home security measures, asking for assistance in installing cameras, upgrading door locks, and creating a safer living space for herself and her child. Her actions were those of someone who understood the risks she faced and who was doing everything within her power to reclaim a sense of control and protection. The events of March 25th were not a spontaneous incident. They were, tragically, the culmination of an ongoing pattern of intimidation and disregard for boundaries. Tyrone Thompson had been sentenced in October 2021 after being found guilty of assaulting Mackenzie, damaging her property, and engaging in threatening behavior. However, the system allowed him to re-enter her life after serving only a short sentence, and only 16 days after his release, the worst-case scenario unfolded. The AVO, intended to serve as a safeguard for Mackenzie, ultimately proved insufficient. Despite her warnings, despite the legal boundaries in place, the document designed to protect her failed to keep danger at bay. As the initial response subsided and the reality of the situation set in, the Newcastle City Police District formally launched a major investigation. The operation was designated Strikeforce Slant, signaling the beginning of a comprehensive inquiry designed to uncover every detail, every decision, and every moment that had led to this tragedy. The investigation began with a painstaking review of the crime scene. Forensic specialists and detectives spent hours inside Mackenzie's unit, examining every room, every corner, and every item for clues. The apartment told a story in objects. Overturned furniture hinted, Scattered belongings suggested panic and urgency. The veranda where Mackenzie had been found was a focal point for the forensic team. Marked by dark stains and shattered fragments of the broken knife, it was a place that bore silent witness to a heartbreaking confrontation. Digital evidence soon emerged as a vital pillar of the case. Investigators analyzed Mackenzie's mobile phone, uncovering messages, call logs, and communication threads that illustrated the full scope of her interactions with Thompson after his release. Some of the messages were pleading, others resigned, and some even strangely civil, showing the emotional complexity of their connection. This mix of fear, fatigue, and hope told a deeper story, one of a woman navigating the impossible terrain between survival and stability. Thompson's digital footprint also extended beyond Mackenzie. He had contacted people associated with her new relationship, messaging them, probing for information, or attempting to reassert influence over her life. These communications, once retrieved from servers and matched with telecommunications records, showed a clear pattern of breaches against the standing AVO. Investigators also spoke at length with Mackenzie's close contacts. Her mother, Tabitha Ackrit, gave a deeply moving statement, sharing insight into her daughter's final days. Mackenzie lived in constant fear after Tyrone's release, she said during court proceedings. She told me he wouldn't let her go. Her words echoed what Mackenzie had reportedly confided to friends. She felt like a prisoner in her own life, unable to move forward, and unsure how to escape the shadow that Thompson had cast over her. One of Mackenzie's friends told officers that she had made her child's safety her top priority, and yet, no matter what steps she took, she couldn't see a clear way out. The emotional toll was immense. The friend described her as someone who wanted nothing more than peace. A life free from fear, where her son could grow up without trauma, and where she could finally begin healing from the wounds of the past. During the hours that followed his arrest, Tyrone Thompson was questioned by detectives under formal interview conditions, a procedure that marked a critical turning point in the unfolding investigation. His demeanor during the sessions was described as guarded, reserved, yet revealing in key ways. As the conversations progressed, inconsistencies began to emerge, raising further concerns for the officers overseeing the case. Although he maintained a tone of cooperation, his narrative shifted under pressure, a red flag for experienced investigators. According to court documents later cited by the Newcastle Herald, Thompson initially described the tragic event as a misunderstanding, one born from heightened emotions and a breakdown in communication. He acknowledged being at Mackenzie Anderson's apartment that night. When asked how he justified this, he claimed that Mackenzie herself had invited him. His explanation painted a version of events where he was not only welcome, but allegedly there in hopes of reconciling or at least communicating peacefully. As the interview progressed, Thompson offered a version of events in which a heated argument had erupted, escalating quickly into a confrontation. He alleged that Mackenzie had been the one to introduce a weapon into the situation, claiming she was holding a kitchen knife in what he described as a moment of emotional intensity. He told police that his hand injury had been the result of attempting to protect himself, claiming he had tried to take the knife from her. "She came at me, and I just reacted," he reportedly said, suggesting his actions were defensive, not premeditated or retaliatory. However, this narrative, while initially structured to appear plausible, did not withstand the scrutiny of detailed police questioning. The detectives noticed discrepancies in the timeline he offered. His story shifted in subtle ways each time it was retold. The account failed to align with physical evidence collected from the scene, including the broken knife, split into blade and handle, as well as the nature of Mackenzie's injuries and witness statements describing her visible fear in the days and hours before the incident. Investigators continued pressing him, not only about the night in question, but also about his actions leading up to it. They presented clear evidence showing that he had contacted Mackenzie numerous times following his release from custody on March 9, 2022. Thompson attempted to downplay the significance of these actions, framing them as emotional outreach and an effort to clear the air. He claimed his intention was never harmful, that he merely sought closure or reconnection due to their complicated past. However, These justifications stood in sharp contrast to Mackenzie's own written communications to advocacy organizations, where she expressed ongoing fear and the strong belief that he would come after her again. The detectives also investigated the possible impact of another figure who had been in Mackenzie's life at the time, a male friend who was present at her apartment earlier that evening. Officers questioned Thompson about whether feelings of jealousy or perceived rivalry could have played a role in the escalation. Although he dismissed the suggestion, the possibility of emotional provocation added another layer to the psychological profile being built around the case. As Thompson remained in custody and the legal proceedings advanced, the evidence against him grew more substantial. A forensic report issued during the investigation confirmed that Mackenzie's DNA had been found on the blade of the broken knife, while Thompson's DNA was located on the handle, significantly undermining his claims of merely trying to defend himself. These forensic connections were crucial in establishing a clearer understanding of the confrontation and his proximity to the weapon. On March 27, 2022, formal charges were brought against Tyrone Thompson. These included a charge of murder, multiple counts of breach of arrest, and additional offenses relating to his behavior, both on the night of the tragedy and in the lead-up to it. The murder charge was anchored in a body of compelling evidence, ranging from DNA analysis and digital records to eyewitness testimony and Thompson's own admissions. The charge sheet also cited patterns of threatening behavior, reinforcing the view that his actions had not occurred in a vacuum but were instead part of an escalating pattern of control and intimidation. Though Thompson never clearly articulated a motive, the investigation, led by Strikeforce Slant and supported by experts in domestic violence cases, uncovered troubling patterns. According to those familiar with the case, including social workers and analysts who were brought in to interpret the emotional dynamics, Thompson's repeated violations of court orders and refusal to accept Mackenzie's separation pointed to a deeper psychological motive: control. They concluded that his inability to accept the end of their relationship, combined with his knowledge that she was trying to move on and protect her son, drove a need to reassert power over her life. The presence of another male on the night of March 25th may have served as a trigger, intensifying his already obsessive behavior. Although the charges marked a meaningful step toward justice, they also served as a sobering reminder of the systemic issues that had allowed this situation to escalate. The enforcement of the order had failed to stop contact. Despite Mackenzie's repeated attempts to seek help, including her requests for increased home security and documented communications with support services, the danger had remained real and unrelenting. By early 2025, the case reached a pivotal chapter. The legal proceedings progressed to the Supreme Court of New South Wales in Newcastle, with the trial scheduled to begin on April 7th of that year. It was expected to last approximately 4 weeks, and both the prosecution and defense had prepared for an intense and emotionally taxing process. However, just days before the trial was set to begin, there was a dramatic shift. On April 1st, 2025, less than a week before opening arguments, Tyrone Thompson entered a guilty plea in open court. At 25 years old, after years of denial and a continued not guilty stance, he pleaded guilty to the domestic violence-related murder of Mackenzie Anderson. The plea stunned those in attendance, bringing the long-awaited resolution to a case that had gripped the Newcastle community and beyond. This unexpected development eliminated the need for a full trial, sparing Mackenzie's loved ones from reliving the details in a public courtroom setting. But while the plea avoided a drawn-out judicial process, it shifted the emotional weight to the sentencing phase, where the court would deliberate on the consequences Thompson should face for his actions. The sentencing hearing was presided over by Justice Richard Weinstein. In the courtroom, Crown Prosecutor Brendan Queen led the case for the state, presenting a powerful and comprehensive account of the impact Mackenzie's death had caused. The prosecution emphasized not just the physical evidence and timeline of events, but also the psychological and emotional toll inflicted upon Mackenzie in the months leading up to the tragedy. Central to the prosecution's argument was Mackenzie's ongoing vulnerability. They presented her emails to advocacy organizations, in which she had clearly outlined her fears and detailed the persistent sense of danger she lived with. The court heard how Mackenzie had expressed deep concern that Tyrone Thompson would not allow her to move on with her life peacefully. These communications highlighted her repeated efforts to seek safety and the systematic failure of those protections to shield her from further harm. The legal proceedings surrounding Tyrone Thompson's sentencing reached an emotionally charged and highly scrutinized point as both sides presented their final arguments to the court. The defense team, representing Thompson, acknowledged the weight of what had occurred and the irreversible pain inflicted upon Mackenzie Anderson and her loved ones. However, in seeking leniency from the court, they brought forth a set of mitigating factors they hoped would be considered during sentencing. As outlined in reports by Newcastle Weekly and other local outlets, the defense argued that Thompson's actions, while undeniably tragic, had taken place within the context of significant personal challenges. They cited his history of mental health difficulties, as well as a turbulent and disadvantaged upbringing, as contributing factors that may have impaired his ability to manage conflict and regulate his emotional responses. His legal counsel emphasized that while Thompson was not experiencing psychosis or a diagnosable psychological break at the time of the incident, he was, in their words, emotionally unstable. And this instability played a key role in the escalation that led to Mackenzie's death. As part of the defense's submissions, an apology letter written by Thompson was entered into the court record. In the letter, he expressed remorse, writing, "No words can undo the pain and devastation I caused to someone I genuinely loved." The statement, while emotional on its surface, was met with skepticism from the prosecution and later from the bench itself. Crown prosecutor Brendan Queen challenged the depth and sincerity of Thompson's claimed remorse. He pointed specifically to portions of Thompson's letter that appeared to shift partial responsibility back onto Mackenzie, most notably, the line describing their relationship. Queen argued that this type of language subtly invoked a narrative of shared fault, and by doing so, suggested elements of victim blaming. In a case centered on control, intimidation, and repeated breaches of protective orders, this characterization struck a nerve not only in the courtroom, but among those observing the case publicly. Justice Richard Weinstein, presiding over the proceedings, also questioned the genuine intent behind the apology. While he acknowledged that remorse, when sincere, can be an important factor in sentencing, he remarked that the letter offered limited insight into Thompson's internal reckoning or emotional accountability. Expressions of regret must be weighed against actions, the judge noted, and in this case, the evidence speaks louder than the words. On May 1, 2025, Justice Weinstein handed down the long-awaited sentence. Tyrone Thompson was sentenced to 22 years and 6 months in prison, with a non-parole period of 15 years and 6 months, meaning he would be eligible to apply for parole no earlier than October 2038. In delivering the verdict, the judge characterized the incident not as a spontaneous mistake, but as a frenzied act, one that exhibited a level of intensity and disregard that left a young mother lifeless, a child motherless, and a family shattered. Justice Weinstein gave careful consideration to the aggravating factors. He pointed to Thompson's prior history, his repeated breaches of legal orders, and the fact that Mackenzie had been living in a state of documented fear in the weeks leading up to her death. Her vulnerability and repeated attempts to seek safety were weighed heavily in the judgment. However, in balancing these factors, the judge also took into account the guilty plea, which, while late in the process, spared the family the trauma of a full-length trial, and Thompson's personal circumstances, including his mental health history and reported efforts to engage in rehabilitation. The sentence immediately sparked a wave of public and personal outrage, especially from Mackenzie's grieving family, who had waited years for justice to be served. Outside the Newcastle Supreme Court, Mackenzie's mother, Tabitha Ackritt, collapsed in tears while speaking to reporters. Her voice, heavy with heartbreak, cut through the noise of legal language and courtroom decorum. "Whilst this might be thought of as a good outcome for the courts," she said, "we are disgusted that this sentence is what they think the value of my daughter's life was worth." Her statement was more than just the voice of a mourning mother. It became a rallying cry. Tabitha described the sentence as an insult to women everywhere, particularly those who live under the shadow of coercion, fear. She called upon the justice system to rise to the standard that the community expects, to send a clear message that such acts would not be met with soft consequences. Her plea was emotional, raw, and fiercely driven by the hope that no other family would have to endure what hers had. Just under 2 weeks later, on May 14, 2025, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions (DPP) announced that it would formally appeal the sentence, arguing that it was manifestly inadequate, given the gravity of the offense. Prosecutors stated that the original term did not adequately reflect the seriousness of the actions, the breach of legal protection, and the long-standing pattern of intimidation and control that preceded the fatal incident. The announcement was met with relief by Mackenzie's family and supporters. Tabitha, speaking once again to media outlets, expressed gratitude and cautious optimism. "This is the first hurdle to getting a sentence that is more in line with community and moral standards," she said. "We know nothing will bring Mackenzie back, but we hope the legal system will recognize that justice must be more than symbolic." The appeal hearing was scheduled for August 8, 2025, set to take place over a 2-hour session in the Court of Criminal Appeal. Legal analysts noted the significance of the case, not only for its emotional weight, but for its potential to influence how domestic violence-related homicide is approached in sentencing moving forward. Prosecutors indicated they would be urging the court to increase Thompson's sentence substantially, citing the need to set a firm precedent, one that communicates the seriousness of such crimes and the judiciary's commitment to protecting vulnerable individuals. As of now, Thompson remains in prison, his future pending the outcome of the appeal. For Mackenzie's family, the legal journey is far from over, yet their advocacy has evolved into something bigger than any single case. They are now working to raise awareness about systemic failures, the importance of enforcing protection orders, and the urgent need to support those seeking help before danger escalates. Mackenzie's young son, now being raised by her relatives in a home filled with love and remembrance, represents both the loss and the legacy left behind. The fight for justice has become about more than a sentence. It's about sending a message that society must take domestic violence seriously at every stage. From the first signs of coercion to the most tragic outcomes, there is a collective responsibility to respond swiftly and meaningfully. As the court prepares to revisit Thompson's sentence, one question remains at the heart of public discourse. Will the justice system rise to meet the moment and deliver a sentence that truly reflects the cost of Mackenzie Anderson's life? Or will it fall short once again? The answer will not only shape the outcome of one case, but could set the tone for many others still to come.